Brothers and sisters, stop everything now. What I'm about to reveal in the next few minutes will make your blood run cold and your heart race. We are witnessing the most explosive confrontation in modern history, a moment when the American Pope looked the President of the United States in the eye and declared before the entire world, "Your decisions are pushing humanity toward the final abyss." Imagine the scene. The United Nations in complete silence. Cameras from around the world focused on a man dressed in white. And then, like lightning cutting through darkness, the words no one expected to hear explode in the air. "Mr. President, while you ignite conflicts, threaten nations, and normalize violence, children die, families are destroyed, and the doomsday clock approaches midnight." What happened next was not just a political dispute. It was a spiritual war fought in the public square. Threats were made. Secrets were exposed. A president's pride was shattered. And a pope's courage ignited a flame in the conscience of millions. But here's what will leave you speechless. This story didn't end in defeat. It ended with transformation, with tears, with a world leader falling to his knees, acknowledging his mistakes before God and men. Dear faithful friend, join our community by clicking the red subscribe button below on your phone or computer. Leave a comment telling us which city you're watching this video from and your name, so we can pray for you together. But to understand how we reached this apocalyptic moment, we need to go back to the beginning. The morning dawned heavy over New York. Dense clouds covered the Fifth Avenue skyscrapers, and a cutting wind carried the smell of an imminent storm. At the United Nations complex, security teams moved with nervous urgency. Diplomats reviewed final notes, while technicians adjusted cameras and simultaneous translation equipment in the Great Hall of the General Assembly. No one imagined that this day would become the stage for one of the most devastating confrontations of the century. A confrontation that would pit two powerful men against each other. Both Americans, both convinced they were right, but only one willing to sacrifice everything for truth. In the luxurious suite of the Lotte New York Palace, Pope Leo XIV stood by the window, contemplating the threatening horizon, while holding the manuscript of his speech in his hands. His white cassock contrasted dramatically with the stormy sky outside. Beside him, Monsignor Giuseppe Marchetti held an annotated copy of the text with hands trembling with anxiety. "Holy Father," Giuseppe asked in a low, worried voice, pointing to a specific paragraph in the middle of the text. "Are you absolutely certain you want to keep these words about President Trump? We know perfectly well how he reacts when confronted publicly." Pope Leo XIV turned his gaze to Manhattan, where the fog was beginning to swallow the tops of the buildings like ghosts disappearing into nothing. "Giuseppe, if I don't speak clearly now, at this exact moment when the entire planet is paying attention, then when, as we speak, wars are spreading, nuclear arsenals are being threatened, dictators are torturing their people, and the leader of the free world acts as if he's directing an apocalyptic reality show." His voice was loaded with deep pain that came from the depths of his soul. Russia invades sovereign nations. Iran crushes protesters in the streets. China silences voices, and the President of the United States, instead of being a beacon of hope, adds gasoline to the flames. Entire families live terrorized. Children go to sleep afraid that bombs will fall on their beds. Mothers cry for children killed in senseless conflicts. "I don't expect silence," Giuseppe responded carefully, choosing each word with surgical precision. "I just implore you to be prepared for the catastrophic consequences that will come." The Pope turned completely, fixing his eyes on Giuseppe's. "Consequences," he murmured with icy intensity. "The gospel also has consequences." And silence in the face of evil has the worst consequences of all. This moment revealed not only the personal risks involved, but also the brutal moral dilemma faced by religious leaders when confronting secular power. How complicit silence can completely erode any remaining moral authority. At 10 in the morning, the General Assembly Hall was overflowing. Delegates from 193 nations occupied the curved rows of seats. Translators prepared their headphones while television crews adjusted lenses and angles. When Pope Leo XIV entered the chamber, moving with serene dignity that instantly transformed the entire atmosphere of the environment, it was as if a pure and unwavering light had invaded the room. In the third row sat President Donald Trump, wearing a dark navy suit and a vibrant red tie. His expression was indecipherable, a stone face that revealed nothing of what was going on behind it. The Pope began softly, speaking about creation as a divine gift entrusted to humanity. His tone was initially pastoral, the kind that calms restless and anguished souls. But as he progressed, his voice gained weight, urgency, and a prophetic force impossible to ignore. Brothers and sisters, leaders of the world, he declared with absolute authority, there is a crisis we can no longer ignore under the pretext of national sovereignty or economic interests. I'm speaking of the existential crisis that threatens our very survival as a species. Giuseppe, watching from a distance, saw Trump lean toward his national security advisor and whisper something that made the aide visibly stiffen, as if he had received an electric shock. In recent times, the Pope continued with growing intensity that made the air vibrate. We have witnessed policies that treat armed conflicts as power games. We have seen leaders threaten each other with nuclear destruction as if they were children fighting over toys. We have seen dictators massacre peaceful protesters while the civilized world remains in cowardly silence. A heavy and suffocating silence fell over the chamber like a tombstone. Cameras zoomed in on the Pope's face, his furrowed eyebrows, his eyes burning with unwavering moral conviction. And when political leaders defend these actions in the name of national security or public order, I must ask, what security is built on mountains of corpses? What order is maintained through terror and systematic oppression? He made a deliberate and dramatic pause, then turned his gaze directly to Trump with laser intensity that pierced any shield of indifference. There are leaders in this hall, he said, with each word weighing like molten lead, who proclaim themselves defenders of freedom and democracy, leaders who hold Bibles at political rallies to win votes, yet their policies fundamentally contradict the teachings of Christ. I cannot, in good conscience, remain silent in the face of such flagrant hypocrisy. As Matthew says in chapter 25, verse 35, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. It does not say, I was a stranger and you threatened me with missiles before deciding if I deserved compassion. Trump became visibly red. His hands gripped the arms of the chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He exchanged tense and loaded glances with his closest advisors. Mr. President Trump, the Pope continued, now abandoning any pretense of subtle diplomacy, your decisions are leading this planet not toward greatness, but toward total chaos. Every time you threaten a nation with annihilation, every time you ridicule peace agreements, every time you glorify military force over diplomacy, you push humanity one more step toward the final precipice. The entire room seemed to have stopped breathing. Even the translators hesitated, as if doubting their own ears. Russia has already invaded sovereign territories, violating all international laws. Iran brutally represses its own people, crying out for basic freedom. And what does the leader of the free world do? Adds fuel to the inferno, threatens, provokes, incites. The Pope stood fully erect now, his white cassock gleaming under the intense camera lights. 2,000 years ago, he thundered, Another political leader tried to silence a message that disturbed him. Pontius Pilate had the power of Rome behind him, armies, wealth, the capacity to crush any opposition. Yet the truth he tried to suppress survived, not because it had its own armies, but because some truths are stronger than any empire, more enduring than any dictator. When the Pope finished the rest of his speech with a fervent appeal for world peace and moral leadership, the hall exploded in thunderous applause that seemed to make the walls tremble. Delegates rose to their feet, applauding violently, but Trump and his team remained seated, motionless as marble statues, faces carved in pure hostility. No one expected the speed of the response. Barely 2 hours had passed since the end of the speech when Giuseppe's phone began vibrating violently with notifications. He looked at the screen, and his heart plummeted like a stone in free fall. Trump had tweeted, "The so-called Pope just attacked the United States and our sovereign policies at the UN. Very disrespectful. The Vatican receives millions of patriotic Americans. Maybe it's time to reconsider our generosity. Nobody insults America, not even someone in a white dress. America first." The world around Giuseppe seemed to tilt dangerously. He ran to find the Pope, who was preparing for the afternoon sessions. "Holy Father," Giuseppe said breathlessly, words coming out in bursts. "Trump has responded, and it's extremely aggressive." He extended the phone with trembling hands. The Pope read the message twice with deliberate calm. His expression remained composed and serene, but there was a flash, something between deep sadness, bitter disappointment, and an inner determination hardening like steel tempered in fire. "Someone in a white dress," the Pope repeated softly, almost with academic curiosity. "Interesting that a man who never served in military uniform mocks sacred religious vestments. What should we do, Holy Father? Should we respond publicly?" "No," the Pope said with absolute firmness. "We will not enter into a social media war. That is precisely the battlefield he prefers, a media circus, not a serious moral debate." But Trump was just beginning. At 3 in the afternoon, during a hastily called press conference in his hotel lobby, Trump escalated the attack to even more dangerous levels. Cameras fired blinding flashes as he positioned himself aggressively behind the microphone. "I respect religion," he declared with palpable arrogance. "Nobody respects religion more than me. But this Pope Leo, whatever his number is, crossed a giant red line. He comes to our country and insults American policies, attacks a president elected by 75 million Americans. Who elected him? Nobody. A group of old cardinals in red in a locked room. Journalists shouted questions. Trump raised his voice even higher over the tumult. And let me tell you this, millions of American Catholics voted for me. They love me because I defend real faith, family, and religious freedom. This Pope is pushing a dangerous globalist agenda. He doesn't represent them." He pointed at the cameras with an accusing finger. "And since the Vatican wants to play politics, we can play too. My lawyers are already reviewing their tax-exempt status. We'll see who has more power in the end." That night, the unexpected blow came like an earthquake. At 11 at night, the Vatican ambassador in Washington called Giuseppe with desperate urgency in his voice. "Monsignor, the White House has sent a private communication. I must warn you, it is extraordinarily aggressive and threatening." Minutes later, Giuseppe handed the printed message to the Pope. The pontiff read in absolute silence, word by word. "Your Holiness, your speech today was an act of declared war against the United States of America. Tomorrow, I will sign an executive order reviewing all diplomatic relations with the Vatican. I will instruct the Treasury Department to reconsider the tax-exempt status of all Catholic organizations in the United States. I will suspend all American humanitarian aid administered by the Catholic Church globally." This is not an empty threat. It is a concrete fact. You have 24 hours to issue a public apology and retract your statements. Otherwise, you will learn that even a pope can be ignored when a president decides to act with total force. The Pope placed the letter on the table, closed his eyes briefly, and took a deep breath. Giuseppe expected explosive anger, paralyzing fear, any normal human reaction. Instead, the Pope opened his eyes, calm, resolute, almost illuminated from within, with a light that seemed to come from another dimension. "Giuseppe," he said calmly, his voice firm as rock, "convene a press conference for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." "Are you going to apologize?" Giuseppe stammered incredulously. "No, I'm going to respond, but not in the way he expects." "But Holy Father, if you refuse, he will execute these terrible threats. Millions will suffer." The Pope walked slowly to the window. The lights of New York twinkled below like fallen stars scattered on the ground. "Giuseppe," he said softly, but with conviction that cut like a sharp sword, "do you remember Christ's words when Peter raised a sword in Gethsemane?" Matthew chapter 26, verse 52 confirms, "Those who live by the sword will die by the sword." If we respond with fear or compromise to preserve our institutions, then we've already lost everything that matters. He turned from the window and met Giuseppe's trembling gaze. "The church does not exist to protect itself. It exists to serve truth. And tomorrow morning," he said with unwavering determination, "we will serve truth." The following morning dawned cold and crystalline over New York, a sharp contrast to the storm that had exploded the night before. The sun had not yet risen when the lobby of the Lotte New York Palace was already overflowing with reporters from all the major networks on the planet. Camera crews fought for the best positioning. Lights flashed, microphones were tested, anchors rehearsed dramatic openings. A papal press conference announced almost at midnight was unprecedented. A papal press conference in the middle of a diplomatic war with the President of the United States was absolutely unthinkable. Upstairs, in the deep quiet of his suite, Pope Leo XIV prepared for the final confrontation in a silence so dense that even the soft ticking of the wall clock sounded too loud. He was not writing an elaborate formal statement. Instead, he sat with just a hotel napkin folded on the table. Scribbled on it were some short phrases, reminders of ideas, not a rigid script. His fingertips rested on the napkin as if absorbing spiritual strength from its simplicity. Monsignor Giuseppe Marchetti stood behind him, nervously wringing his hands. He had barely slept. "Holy Father," he said gently, desperate to avoid imminent disaster, "there is still time to reconsider. Cardinal Santini has prepared a statement that softens tensions without compromising your fundamental principles. You could read his version. It would calm everything." The Pope turned slowly from the window where he was watching Madison Avenue below. Seeing the morning taxis cut through the streets like yellow comets, his face showed genuine affection, even paternal tenderness, but also an inner steel that made Giuseppe's stomach churn. "Giuseppe, there are moments in human history when the moderate path is not the right path. Moments when silence is cowardly betrayal. Moments when diplomacy becomes criminal complicity. Today is one of those sacred and terrible moments. But Trump is not just angry," Giuseppe insisted desperately. "He is preparing actions that will devastate our missions throughout the world. The poor will suffer directly." Pope Leo XIV placed a gentle hand on the Monsignor's trembling shoulder. "I know perfectly well, and that is exactly why I must speak. Not for myself, not for the Vatican as a political institution, but for those who have no voice at all and no power to defend themselves. If I let fear guide me now at this critical moment, then Christ's call becomes nothing more than an empty religious marketing slogan. Exactly at 9 in the morning, the doors of the hotel conference room opened and the Pope entered. The flash of hundreds of cameras illuminated the chamber like lightning in a storm. Journalists stood shoulder to shoulder, equipment pressed firmly against their chests. Eyes locked on the white figure walking toward the simple wooden table at the front of the room. There was no papal podium, no golden Vatican seal, no throne-like chair, just a table, a microphone, and a man dressed in white. "Good morning," the Pope began in English, his soft American accent echoing with unexpected clarity. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I know many are waiting to hear my response to President Trump's message." The silence in the room was so absolute that even the faint hum of recording equipment seemed thunderous. But before addressing that directly, I want to tell a true story. Several journalists raised their eyebrows in surprise. They expected a carefully legalistic refutation, a diplomatic statement measured to the millimeter. Not this. "When I was 25 years old," the Pope said, his voice carrying painful memories. "I was a young priest in Chicago, working in a homeless shelter. One night, during a brutal winter that froze to the bone, a family arrived, father, mother, 3 small children. They had fled from a war zone in the Middle East. Their homes had been bombed, their neighbors had been killed. They had absolutely nothing but terror in their eyes." He paused, allowing the emotional weight of the words to settle. The father told me something I have never forgotten in 40 years. He said, "Father, if your children were dying of hunger and cold, wouldn't you break any law, cross any border, defy any government to save them?" For 4 decades I have carried that question with me, and the answer has always been the same. Yes, any father or mother would do that without hesitation. The Pope looked around slowly, deliberately. "That is the point I tried to make yesterday at the United Nations. I was not attacking the United States. I was defending the dignity of families caught in systems much larger than themselves. I was asking world leaders to remember that their decisions have consequences in real lives." A CNN correspondent raised his hand, but the Pope raised his own, gently signaling that he had not yet finished. "Now," he said, voice firm as granite rock, "regarding President Trump's message," he lifted a folded paper from the table and placed it before him. A murmur rippled through the room like a wave. Everyone immediately recognized it. The private message leaked by the Vatican embassy. "The president threatens to break diplomatic relations with the Holy See, threatens to remove tax exemptions from Catholic organizations in the United States, threatens to suspend humanitarian aid that we administer globally, and demands that I apologize publicly within 24 hours. Every journalist's fingers flew over keyboards. Some mouths hung open in shock. "My response," the Pope said, leaning slightly toward the microphone, each word dropping like a nuclear bomb. "It is this: I will not apologize, I will not retract my words, and I will tell you exactly why." The statement detonated like explosives. "President Trump," the Pope continued with growing intensity, "you threaten institutions that feed the hungry, care for the sick, shelter the poor, institutions that serve millions regardless of religion, nationality, or political status. You do this because I said that pushing the world toward chaos is morally wrong. What does this tell me about you? It tells me you are willing to use human suffering as a political weapon. It tells me your ego is more important than the welfare of millions. It tells me you confuse brute intimidation with true strength." Giuseppe, watching from the side, felt his pulse pounding violently. The Pope had crossed a line that no pontiff in living memory had ever crossed. "Mr. President," Pope Leo XIV continued with prophetic power, "you can review tax exemptions. That is within your legal power. But you do not have the power to silence truth. You do not have the power to intimidate human conscience." And you certainly do not have the power to threaten Almighty God. Gasps spread through the stunned audience. Reporters stopped typing mid-sentence. And here is the tragic irony, the Pope said, his voice becoming softer but even more penetrating. You and I are both Americans. We both claim to love the values that shaped this nation. Freedom, human dignity, the right to seek a better life. Yet while you build walls of hatred and threaten entire nations with annihilation, I must remind you that the United States was built by immigrants, including your own family, Mr. President. A wave of shocked whispers rolled through the room like a tsunami. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. These are not poetic decorations on a statue. They are the soul of what America should represent to the world. The Pope took a deep breath. If you remove tax exemptions for Catholic charitable institutions, yes, those ministries will suffer terribly. Soup kitchens will close, clinics will turn away patients, schools in poor neighborhoods will lose vital funding, real people will face real pain and indescribable suffering. He paused dramatically. But that suffering will be your moral responsibility, not mine, because the entire world will know that you chose to punish the poor and vulnerable, to avenge your wounded pride. The Pope stood up, his white cassock gleaming under the flood of camera lights. 2,000 years ago, he said solemnly, another political leader tried to silence a message that deeply disturbed him. Pontius Pilate had the power of Rome, armies, wealth, the capacity to crush opposition, yet the truth he tried to suppress survived, not because it had its own armies, but because some truths are stronger than any empire, more enduring than any tyrant. The room could barely breathe. So, President Trump, the Pope declared with absolute authority, use the power of your office, do what you believe you must, but know this with certainty. Long after we both depart this world, long after today's headlines disappear, the Catholic Church will continue defending the vulnerable. We will continue speaking truth to power, and we will continue believing that compassion is infinitely stronger than cruelty. He raised Trump's letter for the cameras to see clearly. And I will keep this, not as a trophy of victory, but as a reminder of the deadly dangers of fear and the absolute necessity of moral courage. If those with moral platforms fall silent because they fear personal consequences, then we lose everything worth defending. He placed the paper on the table. May God bless all people of goodwill. May God bless refugees, the forgotten, the oppressed. And yes, may God bless President Trump and grant him the wisdom he so desperately needs. The Pope turned to leave. Reporters exploded, shouting questions. Holy Father, aren't you afraid of the consequences? The Pope stopped, turned, and said firmly, I'm afraid of many things. I'm afraid of failing God. I'm afraid of not doing enough for those who suffer, but I'm not afraid of Donald Trump. With that, he walked out, leaving the planet in absolute shock. The 48 hours following the Pope's historic press conference seemed like a violent earthquake rolling beneath the feet of the entire world. Every major network broadcast the speech on constant replay. Clips of Pope Leo XIV holding Trump's letter appeared on airport televisions, coffee shops, living rooms. Headlines screamed in bold letters, Pope refuses apology. Global confrontation. Trump threatens total retaliation. At the Vatican, the bells of St. Peter's Square rang over crowds lighting candles, some praying, others applauding, all absolutely overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened in human history. But in Washington, D.C., the climate was drastically different. Inside the West Wing, tensions swirled like a storm cloud about to explode. President Trump spent the entire first day pacing back and forth in the Oval Office, cursing, gesticulating furiously at the TV every time the Pope's face appeared. He turned up the volume so loud that officials in the corridor could hear every angry word. He insulted me. Trump repeated endlessly, like a scratched record. Used my family history against me, said I confuse intimidation with strength, mocked me before the entire planet. His advisors sat uncomfortably, exchanging urgent and worried glances. They knew the president well enough to recognize that this wound went much deeper than politics. It was personal. And when things became personal, Trump's instincts often plunged into dangerous and unpredictable territory. The National Security Advisor finally stepped forward courageously. Mr. President, the anger is understandable, but we need to consider the long-term consequences of an aggressive response. If you sign the executive orders now, the economic and diplomatic repercussions could be catastrophic. Trump slammed his fist on the resolute desk with brutal force. I don't care one bit. Prepare the orders. I'll sign them within an hour. It was then that Sarah Chen, the chief of staff, entered the room silently. She was normally calm, methodical, absolutely composed, but today she seemed hesitant, almost nervous. Sir, she said carefully, choosing each word, before you act, there is someone who asked to speak with you in private. Trump stared at her suspiciously. Who? Sarah looked at the door. The First Lady. Trump blinked, confused. Melania rarely got involved in political crises, but moments later she appeared in the doorway, elegant, serene, but carrying a seriousness that made the entire room fall into absolute silence. She nodded politely to the others. Can we have the room? She asked softly. The advisors hesitated, then filed out silently. The door closed with a soft click. Melania walked slowly toward him, stopping just a few steps away. The president straightened instinctively, preparing for a difficult conversation. Donald, she began, her accent gentle but her tone absolutely firm. I need you to listen to me. Really listen to me. Trump opened his mouth to respond, but she raised a hand. Please let me speak first. There was something in her eyes, something vulnerable but unwavering that made him fall completely silent. You are wrong about this, Melania said directly. Completely wrong. Trump stared at her as if he had heard wrong. Wrong about the Pope. Melania, he attacked me. He defended peace, she replied. He defended families like mine, like yours before you became successful. You forget that I was an immigrant. You forget that your own grandfather came from Germany with nothing. Trump rubbed the back of his neck. This is politics, Melania. You don't understand how these things work. Melania took a step closer. No, you don't understand faith. Millions of Catholics who voted for you now feel you are forcing them to choose between their president and their conscience. And Catholics take conscience very, very seriously. She paused, letting that sink in. Do you know what people will choose? She whispered intensely. Not you. Those words hit Trump harder than any headline, harder than any poll. Melania took a deep breath, her voice becoming softer. This fight with the Pope is not about power. It's about who you want to be, how you want to be remembered. Do you want history to say you punished the poor because you were angry, that you hurt children to win an argument? Trump looked away, swallowing hard. Melania rarely spoke so directly about politics, rarely spoke about anything political. But when she spoke, her words carried a weight that even the president could not ignore. And in that exact moment, something changed. Something small but significant. For the first time since the confrontation began, Trump said absolutely nothing. Melania stepped back, resting her hand gently on his arm. Think carefully, Donald. Not about winning, not about your wounded pride. Think about what is right. When she left the room, the president remained seated at the resolute desk for a long time, staring at the flags behind him. He did not ask for the executive orders. That afternoon, while the world held its breath collectively, Trump opened his phone and stared at his draft tweets. Several were half-written insults directed at the Pope. One threatened to reconsider all Vatican privileges. Another accused the Pope of being a globalist puppet. Trump hovered his thumb over them for long, tense minutes. Then he deleted each draft. Hours later, the world received the tweet that would change the entire trajectory of the global crisis. I have reflected deeply over the past few days. I will invite Pope Leo XIV to the White House for a private meeting. Time for two Americans to talk honestly. No cameras, no theater, dialogue, not war. The internet exploded instantly. Some supporters applauded, shocked but hopeful. Others accused Trump of cowardly giving in to pressure. Critics declared victory for the Pope. News channel commentators almost choked on their prepared scripts. In the Vatican's hotel suite in New York, Giuseppe Marchetti almost dropped his coffee when the notification arrived. "Holy Father," he said breathlessly, "you need to see this now." The Pope read the tweet twice, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Interesting," he murmured thoughtfully. "Very interesting." "Will you accept?" Giuseppe asked anxiously. "I have no real choice," the Pope said calmly. "If I refuse, it will seem I fear dialogue. If I accept without conditions, he will completely shape the narrative." "What will you do?" Pope Leo XIV put the phone aside and smiled slightly. "I will accept, but with terms that guarantee total honesty." 3 hours later, the Vatican issued a short but powerful statement. The Pope accepted the invitation, but the meeting should be followed by a joint press session. Both leaders should answer questions directly about what was discussed. Transparency, the statement said, cannot be selective. Trump's advisors went into absolute panic. This was not what they expected, but Trump had made the invitation publicly, and backing down now would seem like cowardly fear. He accepted the conditions through gritted teeth. On a cold Wednesday, Pope Leo XIV arrived at the White House. Marine guards saluted. Cameras fired blinding flashes. Crowds gathered outside with signs, some praising the Pope, others defending Trump, all united by pure fascination with what was about to unfold before their eyes. Inside the Oval Office, Trump waited with an expression that tried to seem confident but revealed undeniable nervousness. His chief of staff spoke softly behind him. "Sir, let him speak first. Listen, don't turn this into victory or defeat. Turn it into understanding." When the doors opened and the Pope entered, a strange strangeness fell over the room. For a brief moment, the two men simply observed each other intensely. They were almost the same height, both Americans, both accustomed to commanding millions. Yet in that room, their power resided in very, very different places. Trump extended his hand. "Holy Father, welcome to the White House." "Mr. President," the Pope responded warmly, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you for the invitation." They sat facing each other, the resolute desk between them. Then, at Trump's gesture, they dismissed all advisors. Only two men remained, one in a dark suit, one in pure white. In the first minutes, they exchanged polite diplomatic phrases. Trump praised the Pope's clarity. The Pope thanked him for the invitation. Then Trump exhaled sharply and broke the superficial cordiality. "Look," he said directly, "I'm not going to pretend. I didn't like what you said. You made me look bad on world television. That was not my intention," the Pope said gently. "My intention was to call attention to policies I consider harmful to world peace." "What's the difference? I am my decisions," Trump retorted. The Pope folded his hands. "No, Mr. President, you are a man with the capacity to change, evolve, grow. You are not defined by your worst choices." Trump blinked, caught off guard. The Pope leaned forward. "Your grandfather came to America seeking opportunity. Do you understand why desperate families cross borders today? They want the same chance he had." Trump stood up and walked to the window overlooking the rose garden. The Pope waited patiently, hands folded. "You want to know my biggest fear?" Trump finally said, his voice low and vulnerable, being forgotten, being seen as a mediocre president who did nothing important. "I want a lasting legacy, then build a legacy of compassion," the Pope responded softly. "It will last longer than any wall, longer than any threat." The conversation continued, moving through world peace, climate change, faith, the crushing pressures of leadership. Gradually, the tension softened. The two men began to see fragments of humanity in each other, fragments buried under years of pride, pain, and public expectation. When they finally emerged for the joint press session, both looked different, not completely reconciled, but no longer mortal enemies. Trump spoke first. "We had a good and productive conversation. I will review our foreign policies. America can be strong and compassionate simultaneously." The Pope followed. "This is not a political victory for me. It is simply doing what is right for humanity." 3 weeks had passed since the extraordinary scene in the White House Rose Garden. But the world still vibrated with its shockwaves. Newspapers continued analyzing every word exchanged between Pope Leo XIV and President Donald Trump. Television programs replayed the recording of the Pope's press conference, his refusal to apologize, and the image of Trump beside him, visibly humbled but trying to maintain composure. Under a pale winter sun, President Trump sat in the Oval Office with a folder before him labeled Executive Actions, Foreign Policy Review. His advisors formed a semicircle behind him. Cameras recorded as he signed an order suspending aggressive military actions and initiating diplomatic dialogues with nations in conflict. He added his bold signature with flourish, looked at the cameras and declared, "This doesn't make me weak, it makes me smart. America can be strong and peaceful." The two are not opposites. The words were not perfect, not poetic, not deeply theological, but they were real. And for the first time in months, they were spoken without antagonism, without bravado masking fear. Trump almost seemed relieved. In the following weeks, the State Department began peace negotiations. Ambassadors were sent to conflict zones. Non-governmental organizations that were preparing for massive cuts breathed in relief. But the most dramatic change came when the administration quietly ordered the withdrawal of nuclear threats and initiated disarmament talks. News channels captured the emotional scenes, world leaders falling to their knees in gratitude, humanitarian workers crying as peace centers transformed into places of hope instead of despair. The country reacted in complex ways. Trump's most devoted supporters felt betrayed, accusing him of cowardly giving in to globalist pressure. But a surprising number of religious conservatives expressed deep gratitude. For them, the Pope's moral clarity had awakened something ancient, something older than politics, something closer to universal human conscience. A poll showed a notable shift. 58% of Americans supported the new policy, including many who previously favored an aggressive stance. The numbers stunned political analysts completely. Something profound had changed in the nation's collective heart. At the Vatican, Pope Leo XIV reviewed the news on his tablet, his eyebrows united in a mixture of hope and caution, recognizing that changes like this, while significant, require continuous vigilance. Giuseppe entered the office carrying stacks of reports. "Holy Father," he said animatedly, and the president signed the order. "It's all over the news." The Pope nodded slowly. "It is a beginning," he said carefully. "Only a beginning. But beginnings matter tremendously." "Should I prepare a public statement?" "Yes," the Pope said. "Acknowledge his action, encourage him, but remind the world that implementation, not promises, is what protects lives. Words open doors, actions keep them open." That afternoon, The Vatican issued a clear and measured statement praising the humanitarian direction of the new policy, emphasizing the need for consistent application. It was fair, firm, and reflected precisely what the Pope had become in the eyes of many. A shepherd willing to confront power, but also willing to recognize genuine progress. The effects extended far beyond the United States. In Brazil, bishops cited Pope Leo XIV's speech to challenge environmentally destructive policies. In the Philippines, activists invoked the Pope's courage when protesting against violent campaigns. In Poland, young Catholics called on their bishops to confront extreme nationalism with the same prophetic boldness that the Pope had demonstrated. This global moral awakening thrilled some Vatican leaders and terrified others. Cardinal Wallstein traveled to Rome to meet with the Pope privately. His tone was respectful, but the lines of concern on his forehead were as deep as canyons. "Holy Father," he said carefully, "what you did was extraordinary, but it raised expectations to almost impossible levels. Every time the Church fails to confront a political injustice, the faithful will accuse us of flagrant hypocrisy." The Pope considered these words for a long moment before responding thoughtfully. "Perhaps that is the point, Henry. For too long we have been comfortable with silence, comfortable with neutrality masked as prudence. If my actions make silence more difficult, then I welcome that difficulty with open arms." The Church was not founded to be comfortable. Meanwhile, in the United States, the Church's internal landscape began to change dramatically. Bishops who had criticized the Pope's initial confrontation now found themselves confronted with undeniable results: peace being negotiated, threats being withdrawn, policies being softened. One of the most vocal critics, Cardinal Thomas Burke of Boston, requested a private call with the Pope. When his face appeared on the Vatican screen, his eyes were red, almost tearful. "Holy Father," he said, voice trembling emotionally, "I owe you a sincere apology. I judged you harshly. I believed your confrontation with the President was proud, reckless, dangerous. Now I see it was absolutely necessary. You saw something I did not see, that silence is sometimes the greatest danger of all." The Pope smiled gently. "Thomas, we all struggle to discern the space between prudence and cowardice. What matters is that we arrive at truth, even if we take different paths to reach it." Finally, as the year drew to a close, an unprecedented event brought a symbolic culmination to the entire saga, underlining the enduring power of redemption and unity. The White House gleamed with golden light as millions around the world prepared to witness something extraordinary. President Trump had invited Pope Leo XIV for a historic joint announcement, a formal declaration of new policies that would reshape America's role in the world. The East Room was filled with dignitaries, ambassadors, religious leaders from all faiths. Cameras from every major network on the planet focused on the podium where two chairs sat side by side, one for a president, one for a pope. When they entered together, the room rose in spontaneous applause. Trump, in his signature dark suit and red tie, walked beside the Pope, whose white cassock seemed to glow under the chandeliers. They sat, and Trump spoke first, his voice carrying an unfamiliar humility. "Today marks a turning point not just for America, but for the world. I stand here with Pope Leo XIV, a man who challenged me, confronted me, and ultimately helped me see a better path forward." He paused, visibly struggling with emotion. "I've built my life on being strong, on never backing down, on winning at all costs. But this man," he gestured to the Pope, "taught me that true strength isn't in threats or walls or showing who's more powerful. It's in having the courage to change when you're wrong." The Pope sat quietly, his hands folded, allowing Trump to speak from his heart. "So today, I'm announcing several executive actions. Trump continued, his voice growing stronger. We are formally ending all aggressive military posturing. We are opening our borders to refugees in unprecedented numbers, with proper vetting but with compassion. We are committing billions to humanitarian aid, much of it to be administered by Catholic charities and other faith-based organizations. Gasps rippled through the room. Trump raised his hand. I know this shocks some of you. Hell, it shocks me. A few nervous laughs. But I've learned something these past weeks. My grandfather came here with nothing. Melania came here seeking opportunity. Who am I to deny that same chance to families fleeing war and persecution? He turned to the Pope. Your Holiness, I owe you an apology. Not just for the threats, not just for the tweets, though God knows those were bad enough. More laughter, this time genuine, but for losing sight of what this country is supposed to stand for forgetting that we're strongest when we're compassionate. The Pope stood, and the room fell silent. Mr. President, he said warmly, the courage you show today is greater than any military might. To admit error before the world, to change course publicly, to risk political backlash for what is right. This is leadership. He placed his hand on Trump's shoulder. I did not confront you to destroy you. I confronted you because I still believe that you are capable of greatness. Not the greatness of power, but the greatness of service. Trump's eyes glistened. The cameras captured everything. The Pope turned to face the room, his voice rising with prophetic power. What we witness today is proof that no one is beyond redemption, that pride can give way to humility, that even the most hardened hearts can soften when touched by truth. He looked directly into the cameras. To every leader watching around the world, whether you govern nations or corporations, whether you lead armies or classrooms, this is your invitation. Change is possible. Growth is possible. Redemption is possible. To President Putin in Russia, choose peace over conquest. To the supreme leader in Iran, choose freedom over oppression. To President Xi in China, choose dialogue over suppression. To every dictator, every tyrant, every leader who rules by fear, we are watching, the world is watching, and more importantly, God is watching. The room erupted in thunderous applause. Delegates were on their feet, some were crying. Others were praying, all were witnessing history. Trump stood beside the Pope and in an unprecedented gesture extended his hand. The Pope took it and they raised their joined hands together, a symbol of reconciliation, of hope, of the possibility that even the deepest divisions can be bridged. The confrontation between Pope Leo XIV and Donald Trump did not solve all the world's problems. That would be impossible. But it provided invaluable insights into the dynamics of power, faith, and humanity, encouraging everyone to embrace dialogue as a tool for positive transformation. Politics continued its endless battles, but something undeniable had happened, a powerful reminder that moral courage still matters, that truth spoken boldly can change history, and that even leaders hardened by years of conflict can rediscover the humanity within themselves. Years later, historians would look back and say, this was the moment when a pope challenged a president not to defeat him, but to awaken him. This was when faith proved it could still move mountains, or at least soften hearts that had forgotten how to bend. This was when the world remembered that imperfect people can still rise to do what is right. True leadership is not measured by power, but by the courage to change when conscience calls. History is shaped not just by great victories, but by the moments when flawed people choose compassion over pride. At the end of the White House ceremony, Pope Leo XIV stood in silence for a long moment before the assembled crowd, tears streaming silently down his aged face. Then, With a voice choked by the deepest emotion, he uttered these final words that would echo through eternity. Heavenly Father, on this sacred day when we witness the power of transformation and redemption, I come before you with a heart broken by the world's pain, but also filled with unwavering hope. Lord, we see leaders who have chosen paths of violence, but we also witness hardened hearts that have opened to your light. We see nations divided by hatred, but we also see bridges being built by courage. Father, I pray to you, touch the heart of every world leader at this moment. May those who wield the power of war choose the wisdom of peace. May those who sow division discover the strength of unity. May those who have built walls learn to build bridges. And to us, your church, give us courage to never again stand silent before injustice. Give us wisdom to know when to speak and when to listen. Give us love to see your image even in those who oppose us. May this moment mark not the end of our journey, but a new beginning. May the example we witness here today of pride yielding to humility, of power surrendering to compassion, inspire millions to choose the path of peace. And Mr. President, the Pope said, turning to Trump with tears flowing freely, may you continue to walk this new path with courage. May you remember always that your greatest legacy will not be buildings or deals or victories, but the lives changed, the families reunited, the hope restored. Trump stepped forward, and in a moment that shocked even those present, he embraced the Pope. The two men, who weeks earlier had been bitter enemies, held each other as cameras flashed and the world watched in wonder. When they separated, Trump spoke through his own tears. "Holy Father, I'm not a perfect man. I've made terrible mistakes. But I swear before God and these witnesses, I will spend the rest of my time in office trying to be worthy of your faith in me." The Pope placed both hands on Trump's face. "You already are, my son. You already are." The crowd rose in ovation that lasted nearly 10 minutes, around the world, in homes and churches, in mosques and synagogues, in temples and town squares. People of all faiths and no faith wept together, prayed together, hoped together. For in that moment, humanity remembered something essential, that we are not defined by our worst moments, but by our willingness to rise above them. That forgiveness is not weakness, but the highest form of strength. That love, genuine, sacrificial, transformative love, can indeed change the world.